The rain hammered against Emily Carter's windshield as she turned the key one more time. Nothing. Just the hollow click of a dead engine echoing through the empty school parking lot at Lincoln High. Steam rose from under the hood like a ghost escaping its grave. And in that moment, she knew this wasn't mechanical failure. This was war. "You think you can embarrass us?" Derek Thompson's voice cut through the storm from his oversized truck, headlights cutting through the darkness like predatory eyes. "Let's see how tough you really are, military girl. What they did to this teacher will shock you, but what she did to them will inspire you forever." Emily had walked into Lincoln High School 3 months ago, carrying nothing but a worn leather briefcase and quiet confidence that came from surviving places most people only saw in nightmares. At 28, she possessed the rare combination of gentle authority and steel backbone that made even the most rebellious teenagers pay attention. Her auburn hair was always pulled back in a professional bun. Her green eyes held warmth that could comfort a crying student and intensity that could silence a disrupting class with a single glance. Lakewood, Colorado seemed like the perfect place for a fresh start. Mountain views, clean air, and a school district that desperately needed teachers who actually cared. What Emily didn't know was that Lincoln High operated under different rules than the military bases where she'd taught before. Here, tradition trumped merit, and challenging the status quo could be a career-ending mistake. But there was something about Emily they didn't know, something hidden beneath her soft-spoken demeanor and patient teaching style. The dog tags tucked carefully under her blouse told a story of service in Afghanistan, of intelligence analysis that saved lives and strategic thinking that outmaneuvered enemies far more dangerous than small-town bullies. Her first week had been a revelation. Students who'd been written off as hopeless began participating in class discussions. Parents started calling to praise the new English teacher who actually made their kids excited about learning. The principal, Dr. Sarah Martinez, couldn't hide her relief at finally finding someone who could connect with the difficult students that other teachers avoided. That's when Derek Thompson first noticed her, and he didn't like what he saw. Derek had ruled Lincoln High's hallways for 8 years, not as a teacher, but as the assistant principal who controlled discipline, scheduling, and most importantly, which teachers survived their first year. At 42, he'd perfected the art of institutional intimidation, using his position to eliminate anyone who threatened his vision of how schools should operate. That vision didn't include uppity women who thought they could change everything with their fancy ideas and military precision. The first warning sign came during Emily's second faculty meeting, when Derek made what he called harmless observations about women teachers being too emotional for challenging positions. His cronies laughed right on cue, Coach Bradley slapping his knee like Derek had just delivered the punchline of the century. Athletic Director Frank Morrison nodded sagely, as if Derek's wisdom was carved in stone tablets. "I'm just saying," Derek continued, his voice dripping with false reasonableness. "Some positions require a certain firmness that comes more naturally to men. Discipline, authority, respect. These kids need strong role models, not nurturing mother figures." Emily had remained silent during that meeting, filing away every word, every smirk, every knowing glance between Derek's supporters. Her military training had taught her to observe first, assess the battlefield, then plan her strategy accordingly. But she also documented everything, a habit that would prove invaluable in the coming war. If you've ever faced workplace bullying or felt your voice silenced by those in power, share your experience in the comments below. Your story matters and might help someone else find their courage. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against institutional intimidation is simply knowing you're not alone in the fight. and every voice raised makes the next person's battle a little easier. The first real confrontation came when Emily submitted her lesson plans for approval. Innovative approaches that engaged students through technology, creative writing, and real-world applications that made literature relevant to teenage lives. Other teachers had been using the same dusty curriculum for decades, teaching from textbooks older than their students and wondering why nobody cared about learning. Derek rejected Emily's plans immediately, claiming they deviated too far from established educational standards. When Emily asked for specific feedback, he provided vague criticisms about maintaining consistency and respecting traditional methods. The message was crystal clear: conform or face consequences. But Emily didn't conform. She adapted. Instead of arguing directly with Derek, she implemented her methods gradually, building support among students and parents before the administration could object. Her classroom became the highlight of students' days, a place where learning felt like discovery rather than drudgery. Word spread quickly through the tight-knit community that something special was happening in room 237. That success triggered Derek's first serious escalation. He began excluding Emily from department meetings, claiming she was too new to understand important policy discussions. When she requested copies of meeting minutes, Derek either forgot to send them or provided summaries so vague they contained no useful information. The isolation campaign had begun. Emily recognized the tactics immediately. She'd seen similar patterns in military briefings about insurgent psychological warfare. The goal wasn't direct destruction, but gradual erosion of confidence, support, and effectiveness. Derek wanted her to quit voluntarily, saving him the paperwork and potential legal complications of firing a popular teacher. Meanwhile, Derek was building his coalition of support, meeting privately with Coach Bradley and Athletic Director Morrison to discuss what he called the Emily problem. These weren't chance conversations, but strategic planning sessions designed to coordinate their campaign against her. They painted Emily as a disruptive force, someone whose success made their mediocrity more obvious and threatened their comfortable routine. "She's making us all look bad," Coach Bradley complained during one of these informal gatherings. Parents asking why their kids can't have more teachers like her. Administration breathing down our necks about engagement and test scores. This military precision crap is giving everyone unrealistic expectations. Derek nodded sympathetically, already formulating his next move. "She's young, inexperienced, probably dealing with PTSD from her service. We need to document these concerns for everyone's safety. Of course, can't have unstable individuals around impressionable teenagers." The rumor campaign began subtly. Whispered concerns about Emily's mental health, suggestions that military veterans sometimes struggled with civilian authority structures, implications that her success was temporary luck rather than genuine skill. Derek was careful never to make direct accusations, instead planting seeds of doubt that would grow through repetition and social pressure. Emily noticed the change immediately. Colleagues who'd been friendly suddenly avoided eye contact in hallways. Conversations stopped when she entered the teacher's lounge. Support staff became less helpful with routine requests. The institutional machinery was turning against her, slowly but inexorably. But Derek underestimated his opponent. Emily wasn't just documenting his actions. She was analyzing them with the same systematic approach she'd used to track terrorist networks overseas. Every slight, every exclusion, every rumor was recorded with timestamps, witnesses, and context. Her military intelligence background had taught her that information was power, and she was building a comprehensive dossier that would eventually destroy her enemies. The breaking point came when Derek made his most serious mistake. He underestimated Emily's family connections. Her older brother, Marcus, had been calling regularly, sensing something was wrong despite Emily's attempts to downplay the situation. Marcus Carter wasn't just any concerned sibling. He was a special forces operator with 2 tours in Afghanistan and a protective instinct that bordered on legendary among his unit. You sound different," Marcus said during their weekly video call. "Your voice gets that tight quality when you're under stress. What's happening out there?" Emily tried to deflect, explaining about normal workplace adjustment challenges and personality conflicts that would resolve themselves with time. But Marcus had trained to read people's tells, to identify deception and hidden threats that could compromise mission security. His sister was in trouble, and he intended to find out exactly what kind that weekend. Marcus drove up from Fort Carson, ostensibly for a casual visit, but actually to conduct reconnaissance on Emily's situation. He observed the school layout, noted the political dynamics during a brief tour Emily provided, and most importantly, identified the key players in what he recognized as a systematic campaign of harassment. "Derek Thompson," Marcus said over dinner at Emily's apartment, "assistant principal, Wright, former college football player, divorced, lives alone, drives the compensation truck, holds grudges like they're family heirlooms. Classic institutional bully who peaked in high school and never got over it." Emily stared at her brother, amazed at how quickly he'd assessed the situation. "How did you—" "Same way I spot insurgent leaders in hostile territory," Marcus replied. "Behavior patterns, social positioning, psychological profiles. This guy's running a textbook intimidation campaign. Probably done it before to other targets. Question is, what are you planning to do about it?" That conversation changed everything. Not because Marcus offered to intervene directly, but because he helped Emily see the situation through a strategic lens rather than an emotional one. This wasn't personal persecution, it was institutional warfare, and she possessed skills that Derek couldn't imagine in his worst nightmares. The next week brought Derek's most ambitious gambit yet, the announcement of Teacher of the Month nominations. Derek had been angling for this recognition for months, building support among his cronies and ensuring that his name topped the list of candidates. The award came with a small monetary bonus, public recognition, and most importantly, validation of his educational philosophy. But Emily's nomination gained momentum faster than Derek anticipated. Students started an online petition supporting her candidacy. Parents wrote letters to the school board praising her innovative methods. And even some faculty members quietly expressed their support. The grassroots campaign caught Derek completely off guard. He'd been so focused on internal politics that he'd forgotten about the people who actually mattered: the students and their families. The voting wasn't even close. Emily won by a landslide that humiliated Derek and exposed the gap between his self-perception and reality. At the ceremony, parents gave Emily a standing ovation while Derek sat in the back row, his face cycling through shades of red that would have been comical if Emily hadn't recognized the dangerous rage building behind his eyes. That night, Derek made his decision. Subtle harassment hadn't worked. Rumor campaigns had backfired, and political maneuvering had failed spectacularly. It was time for direct action. Time to show this military princess exactly who controlled Lincoln High School. The plan Derek hatched was both cruel and calculated. He would create a situation where Emily appeared incompetent and unstable, ideally captured on video for maximum impact. If he could trigger what looked like a PTSD episode or emotional breakdown, he could justify her removal while portraying himself as a concerned administrator protecting students from a dangerous individual. The perfect opportunity came during the next thunderstorm. Derek had been monitoring Emily's schedule and knew she stayed late most Tuesday nights to grade papers and prepare lessons. Her car was old and occasionally unreliable, perfect cover for what Derek euphemistically called mechanical assistance. Coach Bradley and athletic director Morrison joined Derek in the school parking lot that Tuesday evening, their presence ensuring witnesses who would corroborate whatever story Derek decided to tell. They waited until Emily was alone in the building before Bradley slipped under her car with tools designed to disable rather than destroy, creating problems that would strand her without obvious evidence of sabotage. "Make it look like normal wear and tear," Derek instructed. "Loose battery cables, disconnected fuel line. Nothing that screams vandalism. We want her calling for help, looking helpless, maybe crying a little when she realizes nobody's coming." The storm that night was perfect for Derek's purposes. Heavy rain that would soak Emily to the skin, cold temperatures that would make waiting uncomfortable, and poor visibility that would make her situation seem more desperate. Derek had his phone ready to record what he expected would be Emily's breakdown, evidence he could use to question her stability and fitness for teaching. But as Emily walked out into the storm and discovered her sabotaged vehicle, Derek had no idea he was about to face an opponent who'd survived Taliban ambushes, navigated political minefields in war zones, and possessed tactical thinking that made his playground schemes look like amateur hour. The war for Lincoln High School was about to begin in earnest, and Derek Thompson was woefully unprepared for the enemy he'd chosen to make. Emily stood in the rain for exactly 30 seconds, long enough to assess the situation and confirm her suspicions. This wasn't mechanical failure. Someone had deliberately disabled her car. She could see Derek's truck idling at the edge of the parking lot, headlights off but engine running, waiting for her to panic or cry or beg for help like all his previous victims. Instead, Emily pulled out her phone and made a call that would change everything. "Marcus, it's Emily. They just escalated. I need you to know that whatever happens next, I didn't start this fight, but I'm going to finish it." Marcus Carter arrived at Lincoln High School 43 minutes after Emily's call, his black Jeep cutting through the storm like a blade through silk. What he found wasn't his sister cowering in the rain begging for rescue, but Emily standing calmly beside her disabled vehicle, systematically photographing everything while Derek's truck idled 30 yards away like a predator that had lost its nerve. "You're late," Emily said without looking up from documenting the sabotage under her hood. "I was starting to think you'd gone soft in your old age." Marcus surveyed the scene with practiced efficiency, noting Derek's position, the tactical disadvantage of the parking lot, and most importantly, the calm confidence radiating from his sister despite being outnumbered and theoretically helpless. This wasn't the panicked victim Derek had expected to create. This was a soldier who'd just been handed all the evidence she needed to destroy her enemies. "Tell me you got everything," Marcus said, pulling Emily under the cover of his vehicle. "Photos, audio recordings, witness statements from the janitor who saw them tampering with my car, plus some very interesting financial records I discovered while they thought I was just grading papers." Emily's smile held no warmth, only the deadly precision of someone who'd spent years analyzing enemy patterns and weaknesses. Derek Thompson has no idea who he just declared war on. The revelation of Emily's true background came not through dramatic confession, but through methodical explanation as they drove to her apartment. Marcus, listening with growing admiration, as his sister detailed the intelligence operation she'd been conducting since her first day at Lincoln High. Emily Carter wasn't just a teacher with military experience. She was a former military intelligence analyst who'd spent 3 tours in Afghanistan tracking terrorist networks and building cases that led to high-value target eliminations. I recognized the pattern immediately, Emily explained as they spread her documentation across her kitchen table. Derek's harassment campaign follows classic insurgent tactics: isolation, rumor, warfare. Gradual escalation designed to break morale and force capitulation. But he made the same mistake most amateur operators make. He assumed his target was helpless, and his methods were invisible. The evidence Emily had collected was staggering in its comprehensiveness. Not just documentation of Derek's harassment, but a complete intelligence profile that revealed corruption extending far beyond simple workplace bullying. Financial records showed Derek had been embezzling athletic department funds to support a gambling addiction that had spiraled out of control over the past 2 years. Email chains revealed systematic discrimination against female teachers, with Derek coordinating with Coach Bradley and Athletic Director Morrison to create hostile environments that forced resignations. Most damning of all were the victim statements Emily had quietly collected. 6 female teachers over the past 3 years who'd been driven from Lincoln High through campaigns identical to what Emily was experiencing. Each had been isolated, undermined, and ultimately forced to resign after Derek's psychological warfare broke their will to fight. The pattern was undeniable and legally devastating. "Jennifer Walsh," Emily said, pointing to a photograph of a young woman with haunted eyes. Derek's first victim, math teacher, hired straight out of college, lasted exactly 4 months before they destroyed her confidence so completely she never taught again. She's working at a coffee shop in Denver now, still too traumatized to trust her own abilities. Marcus studied the files with the same intensity he'd once applied to terrorist intelligence reports, recognizing the methodical destruction of human lives for what it was. This isn't workplace harassment, it's systematic predation. Derek's been running a criminal enterprise disguised as school administration. But Derek Thompson had made his most critical error that night in the parking lot. He'd revealed his true nature while Emily was recording everything. The audio captured his voice clearly as he approached her stranded vehicle, not offering assistance, but gloating over her supposed helplessness. "Having car trouble. Military girl." Derek's voice dripped with false concern on the recording. "Shame nobody's around to help you. Maybe next time you'll think twice before trying to show up your betters. Real teachers don't need fancy tricks and military precision. They understand their place in the natural order." What Derek didn't know was that Emily's phone had been streaming everything live to Marcus, who was already en route and recording the conversation from multiple angles. More importantly, Emily had been building relationships with school staff that Derek had dismissed as irrelevant. The janitor who'd witnessed the sabotage. The secretary who'd overheard Derek's discriminatory comments. The maintenance supervisor who'd been asked to delete security footage of previous incidents. The next morning brought Derek's first indication that his perfect plan had catastrophically backfired. Emily arrived at school not broken and defeated, but energized and strategic. She'd spent the night not crying over her victimization, but preparing for total war against the corrupt system Derek represented. "Good morning, Derek," Emily said pleasantly as she passed him in the hallway. "I hope you slept well. Today's going to be a very interesting day for both of us." Derek's confidence wavered for the first time, something in Emily's tone suggesting she knew far more than she should about his activities. But his arrogance quickly reasserted itself. After all, what could one isolated teacher do against his network of institutional support? The answer came during the emergency faculty meeting Derek called to address what he termed concerning behavior patterns among certain staff members. A thinly veiled attack on Emily, designed to isolate her further and justify escalated harassment. Derek had packed the meeting with his supporters, confident that Emily would be too intimidated to defend herself effectively. Instead, Emily stood calmly when Derek finished his character assassination disguised as administrative concern, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to briefing military commanders on life-and-death intelligence matters. "Thank you for that illuminating presentation, Derek," Emily began, her tone professional but carrying undertones that made several faculty members sit up straighter. "Since we're discussing concerning behavior patterns, I'd like to share some documentation I've compiled regarding systematic harassment, financial irregularities, and discriminatory practices that appear to violate federal education law." The silence that followed was deafening, Derek's face cycling through confusion, anger, and the first stirrings of genuine fear as Emily connected her laptop to the projector and began presenting evidence with the clinical precision of a prosecutor delivering closing arguments. The first slides showed Derek's financial crimes, bank records revealing regular transfers from athletic department accounts to offshore gambling sites, forged invoices for equipment that was never purchased, and a pattern of theft that totaled nearly $200,000 over 18 months. The documentation was so thorough that even Derek's supporters began shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Of course, financial crimes pale in comparison to the systematic harassment of female employees, Emily continued, advancing to the next section of her presentation. "I've identified 6 victims over the past 3 years, each following identical patterns of isolation, character assassination, and psychological warfare designed to force resignation." The victim testimonies played like a horror movie in the stunned silence of the faculty lounge. Recorded statements from women whose careers and self-confidence had been systematically destroyed by Derek's coordinated campaigns. Coach Bradley tried to interrupt, claiming the accusations were fabricated. But Emily smoothly countered with corroborating evidence that silenced his objections. Jennifer Walsh, mathematics, driven to resignation after 4 months of harassment, including sabotaged lesson plans, false rumors about mental instability, and direct threats to her employment if she didn't learn her place. Currently working retail despite her master's degree in education. Sarah Chen, English literature, lasted 6 months before Derek's campaign convinced her she was incompetent, despite stellar student evaluations. Now suffers from anxiety attacks triggered by classroom environments. Maria Rodriguez, science, 3 months before forced resignation after Derek coordinated with athletic director Morrison to exclude her from department meetings, reject her curriculum proposals, and spread rumors about her immigration status. Each case built on the previous one, establishing not random conflicts, but deliberate persecution conducted with malicious intent. Derek's face had gone ashen as he realized the scope of Emily's investigation. This wasn't amateur documentation, but professional intelligence gathering that would devastate him in any legal proceeding. But Emily saved her most devastating revelation for last. The audio recording from the previous night's parking lot encounter. Derek's voice filled the room with unmistakable clarity. His cruel taunts and admission of deliberate sabotage destroying any remaining credibility he might have possessed. The faculty meeting ended with Derek storming out, his supporters following in confused retreat, while the remaining teachers sat in stunned silence. Emily had just demonstrated that their colleague wasn't simply difficult or demanding. He was a criminal predator who'd been using institutional authority to destroy lives for personal gratification. Dr. Martinez, the principal who'd been largely unaware of Derek's systematic harassment, approached Emily with obvious distress. Recognizing that her school had been harboring a dangerous individual while she focused on administrative duties rather than personnel management. "Emily, I had no idea the situation was this serious," Dr. Martinez said, her voice shaking with a combination of anger and shame. Why didn't you come to me sooner with these concerns? Because Derek spent considerable effort convincing people that any complaints about him were evidence of the complainant's instability. Emily replied, "Classic isolation tactics designed to prevent victims from seeking help or building coalitions. But I'm not his previous victims. I have resources he never anticipated." Those resources became apparent when Marcus arrived at the school that afternoon. Not in civilian clothes, but in his army dress uniform. Ribbons and decorations announcing his elite status to anyone familiar with military hierarchy. His presence sent a clear message: Emily Carter wasn't fighting alone. And her family included people capable of bringing serious consequences for those who threatened her. Derek's reaction to Marcus was immediate and visceral, the arrogant confidence that had sustained him for years crumbling as he faced someone whose authority was backed by legitimate institutional power rather than small-town politics. Marcus said nothing threatening, simply introduced himself as Emily's brother and inquired about the school's policies regarding employee harassment. But Derek recognized predatory danger when he encountered it. Marcus Carter radiated the kind of controlled lethality that came from years of life-and-death combat experience. This wasn't someone who could be intimidated by bureaucratic maneuvering or institutional pressure. This was a warrior who'd devoted his life to protecting people like Emily from people like Derek. The psychological impact on Derek was immediate and devastating. His harassment campaign had relied on Emily's isolation and perceived helplessness. The arrival of military support shattered those assumptions, forcing Derek to confront the possibility that his actions might have consequences beyond his ability to control or escape. That night, Derek made his most desperate gambit, reaching out to school board members who owed their positions to his political support, spinning a narrative that portrayed Emily as an unstable veteran whose military service had left her paranoid and dangerous. The strategy had worked before with other troublesome teachers. Administrative concerns about liability usually trumped individual employee rights. But Derek's political network was built on mutual self-interest rather than genuine loyalty. When school board members learned about the evidence Emily possessed, their support evaporated faster than morning mist. None of them wanted to be associated with financial crimes, discrimination lawsuits, or the kind of federal investigation that Emily's documentation could trigger. The emergency school board meeting Derek had demanded as his final power play became his public execution. Emily arrived with legal representation provided by Marcus's military contacts, while Derek's supporters began distancing themselves from what they recognized as a sinking ship. Alexandra Chen, Jennifer Walsh's sister, and a civil rights attorney specializing in educational discrimination, presented Emily's case with devastating effectiveness, transforming months of harassment into legal violations that carried serious criminal and civil penalties. The evidence was so comprehensive that Derek's expensive lawyer could only argue for mitigation rather than denial. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexandra addressed the packed auditorium, "what we're discussing tonight isn't workplace conflict, but systematic criminal behavior designed to eliminate female employees through psychological torture. My client has documented not just harassment, but embezzlement, conspiracy, and violations of federal civil rights law that demand immediate action." The victim testimonies that followed were heartbreaking in their similarity. 6 bright, capable women whose careers had been destroyed by Derek's systematic campaigns. Each spoke with quiet dignity about dreams deferred, confidence shattered, and futures derailed by one man's pathological need to dominate and control. Derek's attempts to interrupt were silenced by board members who recognized legal liability when they saw it. His lawyer's objections were overruled by evidence so overwhelming that defense became impossible. The man who'd terrorized Lincoln High School for years found himself exposed as a petty criminal whose crimes had finally caught up with him. The breaking point came when Derek lost control completely, his careful facade cracking under pressure to reveal the ugly reality beneath his professional exterior. Standing before the packed auditorium, he launched into a tirade that confirmed every accusation Emily had made about his character and motivations. "This is ridiculous!" Derek shouted, his face red with rage and desperation. "I built this school's reputation. I maintained discipline when bleeding-heart administrators wanted to coddle problem students. These women couldn't handle real authority, so they come crying with fabricated complaints and stolen documents." The admission of discrimination was damning enough, but Derek's reference to stolen documents revealed knowledge of Emily's investigation that he shouldn't have possessed unless he'd been monitoring her activities illegally. His lawyer's frantic attempts to silence him came too late. Derek had just provided additional evidence of his criminal behavior. Security removed Derek from the meeting as he continued his meltdown, screaming threats and accusations that only reinforced the image of an unstable individual whose authority had corrupted him beyond redemption. The man who'd destroyed so many careers with psychological warfare found himself destroyed by his own inability to control his emotions under pressure. The school board's vote was unanimous. Derek Thompson was terminated immediately, escorted from school property, and banned from any future employment in education. Coach Bradley and athletic director Morrison faced similar consequences for their complicity, their comfortable careers ending as collateral damage in Derek's war against Emily Carter. But the real victory came in the weeks that followed, as Lincoln High School underwent systematic reforms designed to prevent future harassment and discrimination. Emily was appointed to head the new oversight committee, her military precision and investigative skills ensuring that the toxic culture Derek had created would never resurface. The criminal charges filed against Derek sent shockwaves through educational circles. Embezzlement, conspiracy, and civil rights violations carrying prison sentences that transformed him from small-town power broker to cautionary tale. His trial became a media sensation, exposing the dark reality behind institutional harassment that many preferred to ignore. Jennifer Walsh testified at Derek's sentencing hearing, her voice stronger than it had been in years, as she described the long-term impact of his psychological warfare. "He didn't just cost me a job," she said, looking directly at Derek. "He cost me my confidence, my career, my belief in my own abilities. But seeing him held accountable has given me something back. The knowledge that bullies can be stopped when brave people refuse to stay silent." Derek received 18 months in federal prison, a sentence that reflected both his financial crimes and the systematic nature of his harassment campaign. The judge's comments during sentencing emphasized that institutional authority carried responsibilities that Derek had egregiously violated through his predatory behavior. Emily's transformation from victim to victor inspired other harassment survivors to speak out, her methodical approach to documenting abuse becoming a template for similar investigations nationwide. She received speaking invitations from educational conferences, law enforcement agencies, and advocacy groups eager to learn her techniques for building unshakable legal cases. But Emily's greatest satisfaction came from the daily changes at Lincoln High School. Hallways where fear had once reigned now echoed with genuine collaboration and mutual respect. Students noticed the difference immediately. Teachers who'd been walking on eggshells began implementing innovative programs without fear of political retaliation. The foundation Emily established for workplace harassment victims grew beyond her wildest expectations. funded by donations from people who recognized the courage required to stand up to institutional bullies. Jennifer Walsh became the Foundation's first program coordinator. Her own healing journey inspiring others to reclaim their professional lives and personal dignity. Marcus watched his sister's transformation with deep pride. The young woman who'd once needed his protection had become a warrior capable of defending herself and countless others. Their relationship evolved from protective older brother and vulnerable younger sister to equal partners in fighting institutional injustice wherever they encountered it. The final confrontation came when Derek attempted an appeal, hiring expensive lawyers to claim his prosecution was politically motivated and his treatment discriminatory. The attempt backfired spectacularly when Emily's legal team presented additional evidence of his crimes, including victim testimonies from other school districts where Derek had worked previously. The appeals court not only upheld Derek's conviction, but extended his sentence after discovering the true scope of his criminal behavior. A pattern of harassment and financial crimes spanning multiple states and dozens of victims. What had begun as Emily's personal battle became a federal case study in institutional corruption and the importance of thorough investigation. Emily's promotion to assistant principal at Lincoln High School surprised no one. Her leadership during the crisis had demonstrated capabilities that extended far beyond classroom teaching. She implemented reforms that became models for school districts nationwide, creating transparent reporting systems, victim support networks, and accountability measures that made harassment almost impossible to hide. The annual Teacher of the Year ceremony took on special significance, not just recognizing Emily's individual excellence, but celebrating the cultural transformation she'd led at Lincoln High School. Her acceptance speech emphasized teamwork and systematic change rather than personal heroism, deflecting credit to the victims who'd found courage to speak up and the community that had supported justice over comfortable silence. Real courage isn't the absence of fear, Emily told the packed auditorium. It's feeling afraid and acting anyway, knowing that some battles are worth fighting regardless of personal cost. Every person who spoke up, every witness who came forward, every community member who demanded accountability contributed to our victory over institutional bullying. The ripple effects of Emily's victory extended far beyond Lincoln High School, her case establishing legal precedents that strengthened harassment protections for employees in all institutional settings. Law schools began teaching Derek Thompson's prosecution as an example of how thorough documentation and strategic thinking could overcome seemingly insurmountable power imbalances. Emily's personal life blossomed alongside her professional success. She met David Morrison, an investigative journalist covering education reform, during one of her conference presentations. Their relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect for each other's professional dedication and shared commitment to institutional accountability. Marcus remained Emily's closest advisor and strongest supporter. Their bond, forged in combat zones and strengthened through civilian battles, proving unbreakable under any pressure. He eventually transferred to Fort Carson permanently, establishing Colorado roots that allowed him to support Emily's ongoing mission while pursuing his own military career. The dedication ceremony for the Jennifer Walsh Center for Educational Justice marked Emily's complete transformation from harassment victim to institutional reformer. The facility providing legal support, counseling services, and advocacy training for educators facing workplace discrimination. Emily's opening remarks emphasized the collective effort required to create lasting change. Jennifer Walsh's courage in sharing her story made everything else possible, Emily said, standing beside the woman whose testimony had helped convict Derek Thompson. But courage without systematic action remains just heroic gesture. Real change requires documentation, investigation, and the patience to build unshakable legal cases that transform institutions rather than simply punishing individuals. The center's impact extended internationally, Emily's methods being adapted by educators facing harassment in countries where institutional corruption was even more entrenched than it had been at Lincoln High School. Her techniques for building evidence, protecting victims, and coordinating legal responses became standard training for civil rights organizations worldwide. Derek Thompson's release from prison after serving his full sentence marked not his return to respectability, but his permanent exile from any position of institutional authority. His criminal record ensuring that his harassment days were permanently ended. He attempted several business ventures that failed due to his notorious reputation, ultimately relocating to another state where his past was less well known. Emily occasionally received updates about Derek's post-prison struggles, not from schadenfreude, but from professional interest in recidivism patterns among institutional predators. Her research on harassment prevention increasingly focused on early identification and intervention, stopping future Derek Thompsons before they could establish patterns of victimization. The 10th anniversary of Emily's victory over Derek Thompson became an annual celebration at Lincoln High School. Current students learning about the battle that had transformed their educational environment from a place of fear to an institution of genuine learning and mutual respect. Emily's legacy wasn't just personal triumph, but systematic change that protected future generations from institutional bullying. Standing before the assembled students, Emily reflected on the journey from that rainy night in the parking lot to her current position as a nationally recognized expert in institutional reform. The path hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary for both personal healing and societal progress. Some of you will face bullies in your future careers, Emily told the students. Remember that documentation is power. Allies are essential, and persistence overcomes almost any opposition when your cause is just. Don't let anyone convince you that institutional harassment is normal or acceptable. Demand better and fight for the changes you want to see. The lesson Emily taught extended far beyond anti-harassment policies. She'd demonstrated that individual courage combined with systematic thinking could overcome even entrenched corruption when applied with military precision and unwavering determination. Her story became proof that sometimes the quiet ones truly are the most dangerous. To those who mistake kindness for weakness and assume that power makes them untouchable. If this story resonated with your own experiences of standing up to workplace bullies or institutional harassment, know that your courage matters and your voice can make a difference. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not with dramatic gestures, but with patient documentation and strategic thinking that exposes truth and demands justice. The final image of Emily Carter isn't of a victim cowering in the rain, but of a leader whose victory over Derek Thompson became a beacon of hope for everyone who refuses to accept that institutional bullying is simply the price of challenging the status quo. Because some fights are worth having, some bullies need to be stopped, and some victories change everything for the better.